So hey, welcome back and welcome to refactoring our aiming component. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to change the architecture of the aiming component to use a single initialize method like this, just like the movement component did, and then to strip a whole load of code out of the tank and start moving the functionality over to the aiming component. And yeah, we're going to hit a brick wall in it. But I want you to hit that brick wall yourself, or you may not. You may do things slightly better than I have. But I want you to try and do this reorganization. So look back at the video where we set up the tank movement component and see if you can get the tank aiming component to the same sort of architecture where it is actually added here in the blueprint editor and not added as a default sub-object. So refactor the aiming component. Try and move the aiming component to the same architecture as I said. Don't worry if you can't get it working, but see if you can get it at least as far as compiling. If you find your game hard crashes when you play or something, don't worry too much. But just see if you can get it compiling and connect it up in Blueprint like I've got there. And that's going to be a great exercise for you. If you struggle with this, don't worry. It's a pretty open-ended exercise. You're very welcome to stop and just follow my solution. You don't need to feel bad about it. I'm setting a pretty nebulous challenge to allow for lots of different ranges of abilities to get their teeth stuck into this. Okay, so go ahead, pause the video, have a go at that, and when I come back, I will be going through and doing the refactor myself with you. So just before we dive in and start refactoring, let's just give ourselves a little bit of context. Remember that the movement component is nicely separated with the left and right tracks only bound to that component, but the aiming component still has this messy loop where the tank has a reference to the barrel and you have these setters being passed down, etc. So what we're going to do is move the aiming component into the same paradigm as the movement component, that is added in Blueprint using an initialize method, etc. So I'm going to go through this with you, do some refactoring. You're welcome to try and do the refactor yourself. You know, the experienced among you can certainly do that. Just bring the aiming component to the same pattern as the movement component. And then I'm going to lead us to a point at which we have a horrible hard crash, which with no particularly obvious source. And then we're going to use the debugger, the Visual Studio debugger, to actually fix that up. So let's just start this refactor process. Let's have the tank blueprint open so we can remind ourselves that one of the things we are trying to get rid of is this set turret and set barrel reference. In fact, let's be brave and just delete them. We don't need those anymore. We're going to have an initialize method on our tank aiming component, of course. So let's go break some stuff. Over in the tank header file, let's start off. I think I'm actually going to start at the top and just fix up my copyright notice as I did in the tank movement component. So let's just do the copyright notice for the tank header file and the tank aiming component header file. They're the two things we're going to be working on. It kind of signals to me I've touched this thing recently. Sure, if I'd have set it in the project settings in the beginning, then it'd be set. But whenever you notice a problem like this, let's fix it as we go. So in the tank header file, we have this set turret and set barrel reference. Don't need them. Let's get rid of them. Both the set turret and set barrel reference. Let's remove those. And let's remove the code that actually does that setting. So that's great. We can also get rid of, in the tank begin play, you'll notice we're not using it, so let's just ditch it, and let's ditch it from the header file as well if it's in there. You can always put it back, it's really easy to put back begin play. And setup player input component, we're not using that either, so I'm taking setup player input component out of the tank as well. As we're trying to clear up the tank, let's clear it up properly. Okay, now over in the tank, the other thing that we're doing is creating a default sub-object of a tank aiming component. Remember what that does? It makes this tank aiming component inherited here, which we don't have any details for, and it's different to the tank movement component. So we're going to stop doing that. Let's delete the tank aiming component default sub-object creation there, and then let's recompile. I think it'll recompile at this stage. Now, I did a lot of code in a very short amount of time there, so what I'll do is I'll do you the favor, now that hitting compile has saved all the tabs in Visual Studio, I can come into SourceTree while it compiles, and I can show you what I've done. I've deleted a load of code from the tank CPP, all of this stuff that you can see on the screen there. I'll leave it for you for a second. And then you can see what I've done in the header file. Remove the relevant references, that's all. And in the aiming component, I've just changed my copyright notice. Okay, so they're the changes. Now, the hot reload worked. Now let's go look at the tank blueprint. We no longer have this inherited tank aiming component. Fantastic. So let's add it back. Now, will it be visible? Well, it'll be visible in the custom section if we made it the correct type of view. Well, let's go and have a look. Remember, in the tank movement component header file, we annotated as a blueprint spawnable component. Well, let's go and have a look in the tank aiming component header file. And it is already a blueprint spawnable component. If yours isn't, of course, you need this annotation on the tank aiming component. Great, so because it's blueprint spawnable, I can come in here and I can add it as a tank aiming component. Great, there it is, looking just like the tank movement component, and we can actually see the properties on it now. That's fun. Now what we need is one of these initialize methods for the tank movement component. So I'm going to go, for the tank aiming component. I'm going to go look at the tank movement component's initialize method, and I think I won't copy it because it's so different, but I just want to remind myself how that works. I'm using English spelling of initialize, and I'm just setting some references. So on the tank aiming component, we have these pointers to the barrel and turret, which is great. We don't need them on the tank anymore, by the way. So if you look at the tank, we don't need a barrel reference anymore. Let's delete that from the tank. That's no longer necessary. And then in the tank aiming component, we're going to need a new initialize method. Now, it's going to need to be public, isn't it? And it's also going to need to have the same signature as it does in the movement component. So I will use the movement component for that. Here, blueprint callable, category setup, and then it's this initialize. So let's just use that as inspiration. And then be very careful to immediately change it from a utank track pointer to a utank barrel pointer and a utank turret pointer, and then it's going to be barrel to set and turret to set. Okay, so we've made an initialize here. Let's go and define that now. Over in the CPP, I'm going to do it in place of, actually, we don't need anymore this set barrel reference and set turret reference. We're replacing those with just a single initializer there, which just says barrel equals barrel to set and turret equals turret to set. No need to protect these incoming values. If they're null, well, we're going to get null. That's fine. Okay, now I removed a couple of setters from the tank aiming component. So these two set barrel and set turret references, they can go in the tank aiming component. We simply don't need those anymore. And the tank aiming component is reduced down to a constructor, which actually, because of Unreal Magic, we can put in the private section, and I'm going to prefer to do that just so it gets it out my public interface. Then I have an initialize, which takes a couple of things, and an aim at. Protected, we have this firing state, which we did in a couple of videos ago. So yeah, we're all good to go. Let's just have a little recompile of this code, see if we've missed anything. If it compiles, then I'll show you the code changes, and then we'll start to create the actual problem, because I've missed something. Some of you may have seen what I've missed here. I've done this refactoring. Let's just see what compile error I have. Barrel undeclared identifier in tank aiming component 22. Okay, that's an interesting error. That error is nothing to do with the fact that it's an undeclared identifier. It's because earlier on, when I made this initialize method, I didn't put the class in front of it. So the compiler's read through that, got very confused, and thinks the error's on line 22, where it says actually on 20. So let's recompile. That's definitely worth knowing. So when you see an error, just zoom out a little bit. Don't get super focused on it. Oh, it doesn't understand what this barrel is. Yeah, but it doesn't understand what the barrel is because it got stuck trying to read the line before. Yeah, so don't really trust the errors too much. So we have another compile failure, which is again on line 27. We have a barrel. It doesn't understand. And that is because in the tank, I got rid of the barrel reference. I'm going to pop the barrel reference back in the tank for the moment in its header file. Why? Because we're not dealing with taking out this code in the tank, the fire code right now. So let's put that back. Now the source control will tell me what I took out of the tank header file right now. And you can see one of the things I took out was this barrel reference. So I'm going to put it back by copying it from source control, popping it back in like that. Okay, it's got a few extra characters with it, but we'll live. But I'm going to say to do remove, because we know we're going to have to remove this at some point because we want all of this stuff to go over to the aiming component. That's not the idea now. We're trying to do as little as possible while it still compiles. We're just trying to get our thing compiling again. Okay, so let's go back and compile. Don't boil the ocean here. You should be having a feeling at this point that you're a long way from a piece of compilable code. And that should worry you because you may not be able to get back to compilation, which means you'd need to revert to your previous commit, which would be a waste of your time. So hurry up to get it compiled. There you go. It has compiled. That is good. All right. And that's all working. So let's save all in here and then go into the tank blueprint. And we should now have, if we search for initialize, a tank aiming component initializer. We do. That's fantastic. So let's now do the tank aiming component initialization. Doesn't matter whether it's done before or after the movement component. The key is that we soft reference this barrel and this turret here in the blueprint. Great. Okay, so that is done. So let's just compile this up. That compiles. Okay, let's save all and try playing. oh dear, we get a hard crash of Unreal. Well, every time we've had a hard crash of Unreal, my normal response is, oh, well, that often happens. Let's not worry about it. Let's just try opening the editor again. Because sometimes Unreal has a paddy when we make changes to blueprints. One thing I think of is, do my categories all have, are they all string referenced? Well, they're not here. So one of my reactions to those type of hard crashes at the moment with the current bugs in Unreal is to make sure these guys are string referenced in here. And while I'm at it, I would probably do a search for category equals, or just category, across the entire project. And we've paid lip service to doing this before, but let's now go and do it. Let's check where category appears, and wherever it appears, make sure it's properly string referenced. I know I skipped one there, so I'm going to have to go back and get that. So by paying lip service to something, I mean saying, oh, we ought to, without doing anything. Always capture the idea or just deal with it immediately. Only don't deal with it immediately if doing so would really break your context and that you feel like you're opening too many different ideas in your mind in one go. Otherwise, if you can deal with it immediately, do. Otherwise, at least put a to-do in your code so that you do come back and deal with it later, because, of course, we're going to be in the good habit of dealing with to-dos regularly. So I'm just going to search through that once more to make sure all my categories have a string referenced value against them. I think I missed one. Okay, fine, so that's done. Okay, so that was a suspicion that it could be that. Let's recompile. And once it's recompiled, I will open the tank blueprint, which is actually slightly broken, which is interesting. Fix up the execution flow, compile that, save all, and play, and we get a hard crash again. Oh dear. So the interesting thing about this situation is, why is this hard crashing? So you could start saying, well, let's look at the tank implementation file for a start, and let's look at all instances where we use, say, a barrel. And you can say, well, the barrel pointer's protected there, you know, that's fine, etc. You could go through and start to try and work out where the problems are. Is it in the tank aiming component? Don't know, let's go look at the implementation file. Can we see somewhere where we're using unprotected pointers? Barrel, there's no turret in this guy. Move barrel towards is missing pointer protection. We should probably do that because we use a barrel and a turret down here, and it makes no sense to try and move a barrel without them. So we'd better say if not barrel or not turret, then return. So could it be that? Now I'm guessing here. Now there's a better way than guessing, but let's just compile and see what happens. What I'm trying to get you the feeling of is we're a long way from we're not a long way from compilation. We're a long way from a running project. You should be feeling by this amount of time working and this amount of changes, we're 12 minutes into this video or a bit more, that I want to bring this to some sort of conclusion because my source control is sitting with a bunch of uncommitted changes. I've obviously done work here, but something's not working. So, it's compiled. Does it play? No, it crashes. All right. So at this point, because of the length of this video, and also because of the amount of code you've changed, and the fact that you've made some progress, right? We've refactored a bunch of this stuff, initializers, into the tank aiming component. We've connected it up in Blueprint, and it didn't compile. Then we did a load of work, and it now does compile, but it's hard crashing. I'm gonna suggest that you would make a micro commit here. In fact, I'm even going to make a commit, and then later I'm going to squash a couple of different commits together. So I'm going to say here simply moved to blueprint composition of aiming component. Now compiles, but hard crashes on run. And it's okay to make a temporary commit like that to say, okay, I've got it as far as it compiling. Let's capture this work and now go about the job of trying to stop this hard crash because at least it's compiling. All right. And yes, this messes up my list of lecture names, but we can actually squash things together later. I'm actually probably going to rename this commit to the same as the lecture name. But don't be afraid to make a commit because I will be showing you how you could, if you really have a particular vision for how your commits work, just get it committed because you can change stuff later. All right, so we have got a fair distance down the road. We have changed the architecture, but we have a hard crash. In the next video, we are going to focus on how we're going to find the source of that hard crash by attaching the Visual Studio Debugger. So that's going to be pretty cool. I'll see you in there.